That's him. That's the one. Somebody grab him. He's stealing that car." The words hit the parking lot like a gunshot. Sandra Whitmore's voice cut through the Tuesday morning air with the full force of a woman who had never once been told she was wrong. She was already out of her Mercedes, already pointing, already performing, for the small crowd of bystanders beginning to gather near the dealership entrance. A delivery driver stopped mid-stride. Two salespeople appeared at the glass doors. A young couple walking past the lot slowed and turned. And at the center of all of it, standing beside a midnight black Rolls Royce Ghost, completely still, was Marcus. "You." Sandra's finger was aimed directly at his chest. "Don't move. You hear me? Don't you move." Marcus didn't move, but not because she told him to. "I watched you." She stepped closer, voice climbing with every word, playing to the growing crowd like a woman who wanted witnesses. "I watched you walk up to this vehicle. I watched you touch it. That car is worth $250,000, and you put your hands on it like it belongs to you." She pulled out her phone. "It doesn't belong to you. I can tell you that right now. It does not belong to you." Marcus looked at her, said nothing. "Somebody call the police." She turned to the crowd, then back to him. "I'm calling the police right now. Don't let him leave. Somebody make sure he does not leave." The bystanders looked at each other, then at Marcus, then back at her. And Marcus, hands loose at his sides, weight perfectly even, expression unreadable, simply looked at Sandra Whitmore the way a man looks at something he has already decided how to handle. He was in no hurry. He never was. Before we proceed with this story, kindly tell us where you are watching from in the comments. Subscribe for more interesting stories. The crowd wasn't leaving. If anything, it was growing. Word travels fast in a parking lot when a woman is screaming about a stolen Rolls Royce. Two more bystanders had drifted in from the sidewalk. A woman with grocery bags stood near the curb, phone already raised. The delivery driver hadn't moved 10 feet. Sandra felt the audience and leaned into it. "I am a senior client of this dealership." She addressed the crowd as much as she addressed Marcus. "I have been coming here for 11 years, and I have never, not once, seen this man on this property." She pointed at him again, sharp and deliberate. "Not once." Marcus pulled a small notepad from his shirt pocket, uncapped a pen, and began writing something down. Sandra watched him do it, and her jaw tightened. "What are you writing? What is he writing?" She looked at the nearest bystander, then back at Marcus. "Put that away. You don't get to just stand there and—" A security guard named Tim jogged out from the dealership entrance. Early 30s. Nervous energy. The kind of man who did not get paid enough to handle situations like this. Sandra intercepted him before he reached Marcus. "That man. Right there. I watched him walk up to that Rolls Royce. He was testing the door handle. I want him removed right now. Right now." Tim looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Tim. "Good morning," Marcus said. Something in Tim's face shifted, just slightly. Something he couldn't quite name. "Sir, do you have documentation for this vehicle?" Tim asked. Marcus nodded once. "I do." "He needs to show it right now," Sandra cut in, leaning forward. "Right now. He needs to show it right now, or I want him removed from this property. In front of all these people." She said that last part deliberately. In front of all these people. It was a move designed to isolate, to humiliate, to make the crowd a weapon. Marcus did not reach for anything. He simply said, "I'll wait." And the way he said it, not as a request, not as a threat, just as a plain final statement, made Tim step back half a pace without realizing it. Sandra took that as weakness. She stepped closer. "Do you have any idea how much this car costs? Do you have any idea who I am?" Marcus turned and looked at her with an expression that had no anger in it whatsoever. That was the most unsettling thing about him. There was no fear either, just patience. The kind of patience that only comes from a man who has already won and is simply waiting for everyone else to realize it. "I know what the car costs," Marcus said quietly. "I know exactly what it costs." Sandra turned to Tim. "I called the police. They're already on their way. And when they get here, I want this documented. I want his name, I want a report, and I want it on record that I flagged this." Tim looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am." "Don't ma'am me." Her voice sharpened. "Do your job." 2 Lakewood PD units arrived within 7 minutes. Officers Chun and Reyes stepped out. Professional. Calm. They had both been on the job long enough to read a scene before anyone opened their mouth. The crowd parted slightly as they walked through. Sandra moved immediately. "Officers, thank you for coming." She positioned herself between them and Marcus like she owned the situation. This man was attempting to access a $250,000 vehicle. He cannot provide documentation. I want him detained. Officer Chun looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back. "Sir," Chun said, "can I ask your name?" "Marcus Ellison." Chun wrote it down. "And your relationship to this vehicle?" Before Marcus could answer, Sandra cut in. "He doesn't have one. That's the whole point." Her voice had a serrated edge now. "I am a member of the Crown Motor Group VIP client list. I have purchased 4 vehicles from this dealership. 4. I know every senior salesperson in that building. And I have never, not once, seen this man." Someone in the crowd murmured. The delivery driver shook his head slowly. The woman with the grocery bags lowered her phone, not because the scene was less interesting, but because something about it was beginning to shift. Officer Reyes turned to Marcus. "Sir, do you have any ID you can provide?" Marcus reached into his shirt pocket. He produced his driver's license and handed it over without a word. Sandra made a sound of open contempt. "A driver's license. That is all he has." "That's what you asked for," Marcus said. "Don't get smart with me." Her finger came up. "I don't know who you think you are." "That's becoming obvious," Marcus said. The words landed flat. Quiet. Like a door closing. The crowd went still. Sandra turned to Officer Chun. "I want him charged. Trespassing. Attempted theft. Whatever applies. I want charges filed today." Chun and Reyes exchanged a brief look. The kind experienced officers exchange when a situation doesn't quite add up. The man standing in front of them did not move like a thief. He did not speak like a man afraid of what came next. He stood with his hands loose at his sides, weight even, watching Sandra Whitmore with the careful attention of a man quietly filing information away. "Ma'am," Chun said evenly, "we're going to look into this." It was around this time that Marcus stopped engaging entirely. Sandra continued. She made her case to anyone who would listen, to the officers, to Tim, to the crowd that still hadn't fully dispersed. She raised her voice. She referenced her client history. She name-dropped. She threatened legal action against the dealership for failing to screen people in their lot. Marcus stood in silence. He checked his watch once. A simple field watch, military style, worn and scratched. He looked at the time with the mild interest of a man waiting for a meeting he already knew was coming. Then he pulled out his phone and typed a short message. 3 words. Maybe 4. Then he pocketed it. Sandra saw him do it. "Who are you texting?" Marcus didn't look up. "Answer me. Who are you contacting right now?" Nothing. That silence was not passive. It was not submission. It was the silence of a man who had already made a decision and no longer required the approval of the room. There is a particular stillness that comes from men who have served, men who have stood in positions where panic is a liability and composure is the only real weapon. Marcus Ellison wore that stillness like armor. In the crowd, the young couple exchanged a glance. The woman with the grocery bags hadn't left. The delivery driver was now leaning against his truck with his arms crossed, watching, not Marcus, but Sandra. Watching the way you watch someone when you've started to suspect you've been reading the scene wrong from the beginning. Tim leaned toward Officer Reyes and said something quiet. Reyes nodded and walked toward the dealership entrance. Sandra turned back to Chun. I want to press charges. I want that on record. I want to speak to your supervisor. Chun said, Ma'am, we are still assessing the situation. There is nothing to assess. Her voice cracked at the edges now, the specific frustration of a woman accustomed to rooms bending to her will. A man with no documentation, no appointment, no business being here. I have an appointment, Marcus said. He had not moved, had not raised his voice. Everyone turned. Marcus looked at his watch again. 9:45. He let a beat pass. It's 9:42. Sandra stared at him. With whom? Chun asked. Marcus said the name. It was a name Sandra Whitmore recognized. It was a name Tim recognized. And Officer Reyes, who had just emerged from the dealership entrance, walking beside a man in a sharp charcoal suit, also seemed to understand what was about to happen. Because the man in the charcoal suit, Howard Briggs, Regional Director of Crown Motor Group, 23-year industry veteran, was walking toward Marcus Ellison with his hand already extended and his face arranged in the specific expression of a man greeting someone he deeply respected. Marcus. Howard reached him and shook his hand firmly. I am so sorry. I had no idea you were already out here. We were expecting you inside. Sandra Whitmore did not move. Her mouth opened, then closed. The crowd watched. Marcus reached into the inner pocket of a jacket that Tim, only now, realized he had been holding folded over his arm the entire time. He removed a single document. It was crisp legal weight paper, folded in thirds, the kind of paper that carries the specific gravity of finality. He unfolded it and handed it, not to Sandra, not to the officers, but to Howard Briggs. Howard looked at it for exactly 4 seconds. Then he looked at Sandra Whitmore. Then he looked at the ground for a moment, as though recalibrating his understanding of how badly the last 40 minutes had gone. The document was a corporate acquisition letter, signed, countersigned, dated 6 weeks prior. Marcus Ellison had purchased Crown Motor Group, all 3 locations, lock, stock, and every Rolls Royce on the lot. He was not a customer. He was the owner, and the luxury property management firm that Sandra Whitmore served as senior vice president for, the company that held their commercial lease, currently pending renewal. That company was also inside Marcus Ellison's portfolio. She had spent 40 minutes trying to have her landlord arrested, in front of a crowd, in front of 2 police officers, in front of the man's own employees. Someone in the crowd let out a slow breath. The delivery driver uncrossed his arms. The woman with the grocery bags lowered her phone completely. This was no longer something you filmed. This was something you witnessed. Sandra stood in the October sunlight with her pearls and her certainty and her 4-vehicle purchase history, and something in her face simply collapsed. She started. Marcus looked at her, calm, patient, exactly as he had looked at her at the very beginning. I didn't know. I am sorry. No, Marcus said. You didn't. Officer Chun had already lowered his notepad. Howard Briggs was making a quiet phone call 3 steps away, voice low, the controlled tone of a man managing consequences he had not created but would be required to clean up. Tim walked back inside, without a word. The crowd had gone quiet in the specific way crowds go quiet when they realize they have just watched something that cannot be taken back. A few people drifted away. Most stayed, not out of cruelty, out of the deep human need to see a thing through to its end. Sandra looked at the document Howard was still holding. She looked at the Rolls Royce. She looked at Marcus. And for the first time in 40 minutes, she had no move left to make. Mr. Ellison. Her voice had shed its blade completely. She sounded smaller now, compressed. The performance had ended, and what remained beneath it was not impressive. I owe you an apology. I made an assumption, and I was wrong. I can see that now. I hope we can forgive me. Marcus held up one hand. Just barely. Just enough. The gesture wasn't aggressive. It wasn't dismissive. It was simply the gesture of a man who had earned the right to finish a thought without interruption. He waited. The parking lot held its breath. Then he spoke. You called the police on a man standing next to his own property. Not because of what I was doing. Because of what I looked like. Sandra opened her mouth. Marcus continued. In 31 years, I have built 12 companies. I have employed over 400 people. I have poured more into this community than most people in this city will ever know, and I have never once asked for recognition for it. He paused. Not once. He looked at her steadily. And I have been stopped, questioned, followed, reported, more times than I can count, by people who looked at me and made the same calculation you made this morning, that a man who looks like me could not possibly belong in a place like this. He gestured, one slow, deliberate motion, at the gleaming lot around them. That assumption is not a small mistake. It is not an accident. It is a choice. And choices always have consequences. Sandra had nothing left. No volume. No authority. No script. Officer Chun was writing something in his notepad again. Reyes stood with his hands clasped, looking at the pavement. The crowd was still. My team, Marcus said quietly, will be reviewing all commercial leases across our residential portfolio over the next 60 days. He adjusted his jacket. Standard review cycle. Nothing personal. He turned to the crowd and held it for just a moment. Not with anger, not with triumph, with something heavier than both. The look of a man who had carried this weight for decades and was simply, finally, setting it down in the open air where everyone could see what it actually was. Then he nodded once to Officers Chun and Reyes. They nodded back, slowly, with the gravity of men who had witnessed something they would not forget on a Tuesday morning in October. He shook Howard's hand. And then Marcus Ellison walked through the front doors of the dealership he owned, past the cars he owned, through the lobby that would, by end of business that afternoon, carry his name above the entrance. Behind him, Sandra Whitmore stood alone in a parking lot that no longer belonged to her world. The crowd dispersed in silence. The delivery driver got back in his truck. He sat there for a long moment before he started the engine. The Rolls Royce still gleamed in the morning sun, untouched, unbothered, exactly where it had always been. And here is what that parking lot taught everyone who was standing in it that morning. The truth that some people only learn the hard way. Respect is not a gift you hand out selectively, based on what a man is wearing, or what a man looks like, or what you assume a man could possibly own. Respect is the baseline. It is the floor. It is what you give to every human being who stands in front of you before you know a single thing about them. Because you do not always know who you are standing next to. You do not always know what a man has built in silence, what he has survived, what he has earned while the world was busy underestimating him. The moment you forget that, the moment you look at a man and decide, before he speaks a single word, that he could not possibly belong in the room you're standing in, that is the moment you have already lost. Every single time.